Hey, everybody. Everyone having a good Dreamforce today? And yesterday? Yeah, good. Keynote, thumbs up. Yeah, exciting stuff. I missed part of it, but oh well. So this is Best API Features of 2016, a clickbait title, if ever there was one. But hopefully you'll find some useful things in this session. And I'm calling it an homage to progress because I felt like I needed a subtitle. I will be making some forward-looking statements. Don't purchase anything because of anything about those things. So that should sum that up. And my name is Peter Chittum. I run the developer evangelist team in EMEA. And I've worked with Salesforce for about the last 6 years. It's my 7th Dreamforce. If you want to follow me, I am at P. Chittum. There we go. And yes, I mean, best, really, come on, Peter. What is the best API feature? Really, it's the one that helps you get the job done, right? And like I said, hopefully you'll find a few things here that maybe you weren't aware of, and maybe you can use them in your integrations with Salesforce going forward. Because the one thing that excites me the most about Salesforce, and still after 6+ years, is that every 4 months I get a whole bunch of new features to work with, which is great, but at the same time, that steady progression of new stuff can be a little bit difficult to keep tabs with. And if you just look at what goes on in the REST API, and this is just the changes that have been made sort of release by release, it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and it can be very difficult for one person or even a group of people to keep on top of all of the things that are available after a bit of time. So the meta reason for this presentation is that I thought I'd try and inspire people to go back into the release notes. We have a new release coming out in the next few weeks, and try and find something new that will help you do your job better. If you don't read the release notes every release, you'll be missing stuff. Think of it like Christmas. You know, you get to open it up and unwrap it and pick out a few new things, a few new tricks to work with. So there are 3 things that I'm going to spend some time talking about today. And the first one is Composite API. The second one is some improvements to the streaming API. The streaming API is not new by any means. It came out in around 2011. And then there's a new search feature called Parameterized search. Raise your hand if you've already heard of all 3 of these things before you came to this session. Nobody. Oh, that's good. At least everybody will learn one new thing. And I think I could say job well done in that particular case. So let's talk about the Composite API. This is one of my favorite things we've added to the API recently. And if you think about it, you know, we have Salesforce, and we have a whole bunch of client things that might connect to Salesforce. And of course, the way that you're probably going to do that is via the REST API. Okay? The thing is that the REST API has never been good at complex data modeling or doing lots of transactions. So in circumstances like this, where I might have like a tree of data, or maybe 2 parents and a junction object, or maybe I have sort of a process of several things that I need to have happen before I refresh my client application or move my user to the next stage, the REST API can start to get a little bit chatty. And chatty means lots of API requests, and lots of API requests means that you start brushing up against the API request limit in certain orgs. And that's bad. So how can you make this better? So the first one I'm going to talk about is TreeSave. And the API endpoint you can see there. And essentially, this allows me to take a big JSON structure of a lot of data, dump it into the TreeSave API, and it will take care of reconciling parent-to-child records. I don't need to know IDs or anything like that, or I don't even need to know external IDs. I just give it the JSON, and Salesforce takes care of saving all of that. This is an insert-only API, so just be aware of that. It doesn't support things like upserts or updates. but still really useful. The JSON structure looks like this, and it's a lot, actually. So I thought I'd sort of call out a couple of things that were important to pull out of all of that text. The first is that the API request goes against a particular S-object type. And whatever that S-object type of the endpoint, that needs to be the root type of the tree. So I can't have one root object be an account and another one be a contact. If the API endpoint is pointing me to an S-object, that has to be the root of the tree all the way down. But the good news is I can do up to 200 records. So I could do 200, in this case, brokers, or I could potentially do a combination of brokers and properties, right? So you can see in the JSON, there's some child data as well. So I could do a combination of 200 of either all parents or parent and children or whatever. OK? Pretty cool. You guys like it? I think it's great. Now, I'm using for the Composite API, I'm using a use case of sort of two parents and a junction object. But this could also take the form of just a couple of different arbitrary transactions. Because the way that we do this one is we give you a JSON structure where you can just wrap up any arbitrary REST API calls into an outer JSON object, a JSON array, actually. And then you can have all of those go in, either all or none, or you can have it so that certain failures don't impact subsequent failures. And the cool thing about this is I can also pass parameters. So if you can see up here on line number 6, there's a reference ID value. And then further on in line number 11, I'm using that same reference ID value to go back and do a fetch of the same record that I updated. Inserted. So really handy. I can go and create my record. And then if my admin has created formula fields or if there's automatically generated data that I want to retrieve along with that, I can wrap that up into one single request, pass it in, and I can get back the data that I want to. So do you guys want to see it? Because I want to show you. There's actually a third composite REST API endpoint, and it came out about a year ago called Batch. It's a lot like the root composite API, but it doesn't have the atomic transactional qualities. So I'm going to show that one as well to kind of talk through all three alternatives. And part of the reason you should know Batch is because the composite endpoint isn't generally available yet. So just something to bear in mind if you want to go and play with this tomorrow. Let's go out here, and that's actually the wrong browser window. I don't need you. There we go. And somehow, OK, let's do this. Exit show. There we go. That's better. Somehow I think I've managed to log myself out of my org, which was not my intention. So let's get back in there. Actually, what I managed to do is close the browser window that I was working in. So that's always very effective. So I'm going to go ahead and finish my login. And we'll pop off over here to the REST Explorer. So everyone knows I do execute. I get all the stuff out here. And down about here is Composite. So you can see there's two sub-requests. There's tree and there's batch. And the first one I'll do is just a batch request. So if I go and grab my demo stuff here, there we go. And there it is. So you can see here that I have, I'm doing an update on a particular record. And then I am doing a fetch on that next record. And I just had an epiphany that I'm realizing that this is a different org that this particular sample came from. So I'm going to move right on to the tree. There we go. That is not going to work there. OK, so let's pop this in. And we'll take a look at the tree. Now, the root object I'm working with is broker. So I'll make sure to include that in there. And then just to go through this, you can see I have a parent broker record. And then that one parent has some child properties. And then there's a second broker record. So I'm inserting 4 records using this request. And has errors false is always good. And there are my 4 records right there. So going back, I can actually see those brokers. There's Alistair Cray, and there's the properties that were inserted there. So one single request, parents and children, all taken care of. Now, the next thing that I thought would be interesting is to show the 2 parents and a junction record. So again, this is just directly in the composite endpoint like this. And I thought, let's make this even more, because if you think about how the REST API works just in isolation, the most I can ever insert or update or delete at a time is one single record, right? So what if I wanted to have a property inserted, 2 owners of the property that are going to sell it, and then the junction between those, that's 5 requests via the REST API. If I have more properties or more owners, then I have, again, every time I have a new record, I have more requests. So if we go back here, we'll take a look at this one. And if I expand this a little bit, actually, I'll switch back to here so you can see it. Each of these has the reference ID, so I have contact 1, contact 2, and property. And then when I'm creating the junction records, which I'm calling seller records, then I'm just using the parameter that I set in that reference ID, and I'm passing that into, in this case, the payload. But you can pass it either into the URL or into the payload of the actual request, the subsequent request. And the important thing, of course, is that each child request of this array of requests, I'm identifying what's the correct method and what's the correct actual REST endpoint that's going to be processed. Now, in this case, I'm saying all or none true, so that means if there was a single failure, everything should fail, right? I meant to not make that happen, so we'll see if that works out. So let's go take a look, and I'll just execute that. And there we go. So if I see a bunch of HTTP 200 level errors, I should be in good shape. And yes, there we go. So with just a single request, I've managed to do 5 separate requests. Okay? So that's the composite stuff. Let me move on and talk about streaming. OK, so streaming API has been around for a long time. Does anyone not know what the streaming API's purpose is? OK, so very quickly, I'll just go through this. The streaming API is meant to give you a push-based user interface. Before it came along, developers were constantly polling the API to get refreshes from Salesforce. Of course, that uses up API requests. That's not good. It uses long polling. So it's not a true push, but it's the way that we do that at Salesforce today. There are 2 ways that you can actually fire an event to be notified about. One is called a push topic, and this would be a change to some data. And the other one is a generic notification. So some arbitrary thing that might happen, I want to push out a notification. And the demo I'm going to do is with the generic one. This is what push topics look like, though. So with the push topic, you identify an actual query, and records that meet that query will cause the event to occur in the streaming API, and thus notifying any clients that have subscribed to it. The basic process of a client connecting with the streaming API, once they've done authorization, is that they're going to identify themselves as a streaming API client. They're going to then subscribe to one or more channels or topics. And then as things change on the Salesforce side, they will be notified subsequently. Okay? So that's a very high-level explanation of the streaming API for those of you who aren't familiar. There's one little problem, though, that happened before we had what's called durable streaming. And that is that if the client disconnected, we would start losing notifications. And that's just not good. So it limited really the use cases that you could use with the streaming API. And what they've now done is they've given us the ability to replay a given request. So now when the message comes from the streaming API, along with that is something called a replay ID. This is a guaranteed sequential number. You don't necessarily get an exact sequence for a given topic because it does get shared between topics. But you can be guaranteed that if you have a given replay ID and you pass that back after you have reconnected, you will only be given the subsequent messages up to 24 hours. So I can actually now go back and get any messages that I might have dropped, provided I manage to reconnect my client within a 24-hour period. So that's nice. And it also makes it much, much more usable for possibly some kind of enterprise messaging in certain use cases. It is not a true guaranteed delivery. It's not true enterprise messaging. There was actually a really good talk this morning on where we're going in the direction of enterprise messaging, and I'd encourage you to look for that on the recordings for the breakout sessions later on. But it's a sort of close enough for now type of approach. And this particular demo has a little audience participation part. So if you actually go to that URL on your phone, you can send me a message, and I'll play it for you up on the screen. Please, be kind, be appropriate. So let's go take a look at that. All right. So this is the subscription right now, and I pre-populated it with a few messages. You can see that when I reconnected the client this last time, I reconnected with the replay ID of 2. And so down below, people are starting to message me. You can see that 3, 4, and, 5 and 6 have, hello world. Very clever, well done. So there we go, yeah. Oh, no, I wasn't trying to razz you or anything. I wasn't trying to be mean. So there you go. And then, so again, the client disconnects, and I can replay at a different version. The idea here is, of course, that your client has been tracking all along what the last known message was and storing that, so that when it finally reconnects, it can tell Salesforce, this was my last known message, and Salesforce will automatically find the next applicable message to that channel. Okay? So isn't that lots of fun? Cook, Greer, great stuff. Oh, great stuff. Thank you. Yeah. I've done this talk a few times, and I've managed to get tweets from all over the world at one point with Twitter and that sort of thing. It's a fun demo, and fortunately, no one has gone too dark with any of the posts yet, so that's good too. All right. So that is the durable streaming API. If you go and look this up in the streaming API documentation, that little visual force control I showed you is actually available. And you can just install it in your org. And I didn't use that part of it, but you can publish messages and watch them appear all from the same user interface. So you can just kind of get a sense for how it works. All right, so last thing we have is something called parameterized search. So what's the difference between query and search in Salesforce? Who wants to take a guess? Anyone? I know it's kind of loud, so it's probably not the best. Yes? So query, you have a known ID of a record versus search, you don't? Yeah, kind of. So query is one object, search is multiple objects. That's sort of true as well. Yeah, there's one root object in your query. The way that I think of query versus search is queries are deterministic in their results. If I pass in a particular where clause to my query, I should know exactly which records would come back as a result of that. Okay? Search is fuzzy, which is why when you're testing search in Apex, we don't actually let you do proper search tests. We mock that for you. You mock up a result set, and then you test against that result set, because you don't know exactly what you're going to get back. For a long time, we were using something called Lucene as a search engine, and we've been moving into Solar as a search engine. But we sort of change that as we go for whatever is appropriate for the current technology. But for up until recently, the way that you would do search also, this would have been another answer, is Sasal versus Sasal, right? Who loves Sasal? I think Sasal is just one of those technologies I've seen. It's difficult to have, people haven't adopted it very much. I think it's a little bit misunderstood. But the one thing about it is that you need to learn the syntax. It's a proper domain-specific language for searching on Salesforce. And when you have to learn a syntax, maybe sometimes you just don't bother, right? So what I like about parameterized search, actually, there's another problem with Sasal as well, and Sasal, is that if I'm going to use Sasal in a search using the API, I have to take a long string potentially and encode that and pass that as part of my GET request in a single parameter, the Q parameter, right? But actually, working with strings is not fun, right? And there are better ways to do that. And if you think about it, really Sasal is already a set of parameters. Find is a query term. In is saying which fields I want to actually search in. Returning is which objects do I want to get back. And so what somebody did was they came up with the bright idea, why don't we just give developers just different parameters for all these things that we might want to search on? And so that's what parameterized search is. So instead of the Sasal syntax, you have a set of declarative parameters that you can then compile into separate URL parameters and then pass that into your GET request. Or you can alternatively, actually there we go. So that's what that would look like there. Alternatively, if you don't want your search to be passed in clear text over the URL, you could actually go in and make a post request with a JSON payload that contains those same parameters. And JSON is very easy to work with in pretty much every language these days. So it makes searching much, much easier, actually, I think. So actually, originally, when I thought up this talk, I had two ideas. And I went searching for a third one, and this is the one that I found. So actually, I think it's kind of cool what we're doing. So let's jump in and do a demo. All right. So I'll go back to Workbench. There's always a chance Workbench has timed you out, so we'll see. Oh, no, good. That's always good. There we go. We'll do an execute. All right. So now, if I'm going to do a Sasal search, I need to go to the search endpoint, which I'm not seeing at this moment in time. There we go, right there. But parameterized search is right here instead. So let's select that. And I'm just going to go straight to doing a post request. And we'll talk through what it's actually doing. So my search term is here. And I'm saying which fields will I search in. So any text-based field will now be searched by this particular search. There's a default set of fields that I want to return if I don't state otherwise. So if I want to override that, however, I can do that in a given S object. And then there's a few other things that we can do as well, such as setting maximum results for each individual S object, maximum results total for all searches. So there's a lot of nice little fine-tuning features that you can sort of add into your search. So let's go see it work. There we go. And there we go. So in this particular case, I'm searching through 3 different S objects. So one's an account, one is a property, one is a broker. And the nice thing is it's very readable, very declarative, and I don't need to learn a new syntax to understand how my search is going to work. Finally, as I said, I can also make sure that my search isn't actually inspectable by somebody maybe sniffing a URL that I'm making a request on. So it could be further secured from prying eyes. All right. So that pretty much sums everything up that I wanted to talk about. Let's go back in here and wrap things up. So hopefully this gave you 3 specific ideas for how you can do your integrations a little bit differently. But also, hopefully, it maybe inspired you to go and check out those release notes and follow them. Every 4 months, there's new features, there's new functionality. Sometimes we talk about the really big features that like Lightning components. And sometimes these little features just kind of, they can be missed a little bit. So get out there, find the cool stuff in the API, and happy coding. And are there any questions? I think I have 5 minutes, yeah? Yeah, about 5 minutes. There is a microphone right there. That'll help a little bit.
What was the name of the session that you mentioned this morning on enterprise messaging? I'd like to search for it and make sure I see the recording later.
Let's find it afterward, but I'm pretty sure if you search enterprise messaging, you'll find it.
I tried that already.
Oh, did you? Okay, I'll take a look. Oh, what is it? Someone found it.
Change the game with event-driven computing on Salesforce.
Event-driven computing on Salesforce. Event-driven, there's your search term. All right. Any other questions? One right there.
Is it possible to use Sasal to look up related objects on an object that you're looking for? For example, if I'm looking for cases, but I want to search by the owner, can I do that? Because from what I understand, the Sasal only searches for strings in an object.
Yeah, that's right. So Sasal is a text-based search technology, and it doesn't look for relationships at all. So it won't do exactly what you're saying, but Sasal will allow you to do relationship queries. And that one of the reasons when I talk to developers and when I use Sasal, what I'm trying to do is avoid using wildcards in a text field, because those types of searches tend to be less performant. Whereas if you do a Sasal search, you might get better performance out of your search. But if you have specific related values that you're looking for a parent record, then what you might want to do is actually use Sasal in that instance.
So, for example, we're doing a search as you type. So that can be anything. It can be a string in the subject or description, or it can be the name of the person who created this record.
Yeah,
so I don't know ahead of time whether should I do a Sasal or a Sasal. So right now we're doing the Sasal, and I got a recommendation that maybe we should copy on that object another string custom field that will be the name of the, and
Okay.
it's too cumbersome, and I know it will work, but it's insane.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe something we should talk about afterward.
Sure.
But I'm happy to chat more and see if we can kind of come to some sort of clarity about that.
Cool, I'll catch you after this.
Okay, yes. Any other questions? You have 2 minutes.
For
Yes.
the composite request, can you set save points, or is it all or nothing? You were kind of going back to that because I got batch processes that we might want to save the first few hundred records that's successfully saved, but then one fails. Can you just keep on going? In other words, can you save the failed ones and
So what's interesting
kind of know which
about,
ones failed in the batch? You know what I mean, and then reprocess them later. You know what I mean, kind of like a save point.
So batch and composite work in 2 different ways, actually.
Okay.
Composite will allow you to do all or none, or just let individual ones fail. Batch, however, will let you do stop processing. So that might be something to look at, is using batch instead of composite. All right, I think I'm out of time. So thank you very much. Have a great Dreamforce. And enjoy the concert tonight, yeah?